In Port St. Lucie, Florida, there stands a tree the locals call the Devil's Tree. In the 1970s, a cold-blooded killer hung his victims from its twisted branches. Though he died in prison, people believe his spirit and the restless souls of those he murdered remain bound to its roots. At night, the rotted ropes still sway in the wind, creaking with a sound like ragged breath, the last gasps of the hanged. Those who dare to draw near rarely leave whole. Whoa! Florida, though. The summer air was heavy, thick with the swamp's breath, damp earth, rotting leaves, and the faint sting of stagnant water. An old pickup truck rattled to a stop on a dirt road, its headlights slicing the darkness before dying into silence. 4 young travelers climbed out, standing before the wall of forest that marked the edge of Port St. Lucie's wilderness. Ryan was the first to step down, eyes burning with excitement. He had read an old newspaper article about the Devil's Tree, a cursed oak where unspeakable murders had once taken place. For him, this wasn't a warning. It was the perfect urban legend challenge. Lena, his girlfriend, was less enthusiastic. Arms crossed, she stared at the dense tree line with suspicion. "This is insane," she muttered under her breath, though she followed anyway. She wasn't superstitious, not really, but the thought of standing where real people had died twisted her stomach into knots. Chris, tall and broad-shouldered, carried his ever-present video camera. He grinned as he filmed the group, already imagining how the footage would play out. "Found footage gold," he joked, panning across Lena and Maya. But Maya didn't smile. Quiet, withdrawn, she had felt uneasy the moment they pulled off the road. The heaviness in her chest grew stronger with every step. The 4 trekked deeper along the dirt path. The chorus of insects grew sparse, replaced by an unnatural silence. Nearly an hour passed before they stumbled into a small clearing, and there it was. The Devil's Tree. It towered above them, a grotesque sentinel of wood and shadow. Its bark was gnarled and cracked, the limbs bent at odd angles like broken arms. Hollow knots stared back like twisted faces. From the largest branch hung a single rope, frayed and rotting, swaying gently in the warm breeze. The creak it made was sharp, dry, like a strained breath caught in a dying throat. Maya shivered, convinced that unseen eyes were watching from the darkness. Chris raised his camera, tilting slowly upward to capture the full scale of the tree. "Perfect," he whispered. Ryan stepped closer, pressing his palm to the rough bark. Despite the heat around him, the wood was unnaturally cold. For an instant, he swore he felt a faint, steady pulse beneath his hand, like a heartbeat buried in the trunk. He yanked his hand back, masking his unease with a grin. "Here," he said firmly. "We camp here, right under the Devil's Tree." Lena stared once more at the dangling rope, unease clawing at her. But when Ryan struck a match to start a fire and Chris circled eagerly with his camera, she reluctantly joined in. Maya remained seated on the ground, her gaze fixed on the swaying rope, as though she expected something heavy to drop from it at any moment. The night crept in, shadows stretching long and endless. And as darkness swallowed the clearing, the Devil's Tree cast its shadow over them all. "19." The fire crackled and spat, casting trembling light across the clearing. The 4 sat in a rough circle, beer cans in hand, doing their best to laugh, to pretend at ease. But the massive trunk loomed above, its shadow stretching long and heavy, swallowing the fire's glow as if it wanted to smother the night itself. Chris rarely lowered his camera. He moved slowly, capturing every detail. The frayed rope swaying in the breeze, the warped knots in the bark that resembled twisted faces, the firelight flickering against the tree like shadows writhing across its skin. He smiled, satisfied. This was the perfect set for a horror film. Ryan, with the eager tone of a storyteller, recounted what he had read. How a serial killer once bound his victims, tortured them, then hung their bodies from the very branch above them. The man had died in prison, but visitors swore they'd heard the rasp of tightening rope, seen the silhouette of bodies dangling in the dark. His voice dropped lower, savoring the tension. But as he finished, the forest wind rose suddenly, scattering embers through the air. Lena shivered, her gaze fixed on the rope as it swayed harder. "That's enough, Ryan," she snapped quietly, though gooseflesh prickled her arms. Maya hadn't looked away once. Her voice was barely more than a breath. Is there someone hanging there?" All eyes turned upward. Nothing, just the rope, twisting idly. Chris chuckled, but when he glanced at the viewfinder, his grin faltered. On the tiny screen, a faint silhouette dangled from the branch, its shape swaying in rhythm with the rope. He blinked, tilted the camera again, and it was gone. He said nothing. The night thickened. Around them, the forest was unnervingly still. No crickets, no frogs, only the sigh of wind sliding through the branches. The air grew dense, each breath sticking in their throats. Near midnight, Maya bolted upright, pale and trembling. She stammered that she'd heard whispering right against her ear while her eyes were closed. It said my name," she whispered. Ryan brushed it off, insisting it was her imagination. But then, a sharp crack at the base of the tree. All four heard it, clear, distinct, like a rope tightening. Chris swung the camera around, its small light piercing the dark. The rope was swaying violently now, emitting a dry, grating screech, as if some unseen weight was dragging it taut. The fire roared suddenly, then sputtered to embers, leaving only a faint, unsteady glow. The shadow of the tree lengthened, stretching over the camp like a predator's hand. Lena clutched Ryan's arm, whispering that they needed to leave. But the path they had taken was gone, swallowed into an endless wall of black. A chill swept through the clearing, though the air was perfectly still. The rope jerked wildly, then stopped all at once, hanging slack, as if something had just dropped from it. Maya burst into sobs. Chris filmed frantically, but through his lens, he saw only twisted branches, curling and stretching like skeletal arms, waiting to receive them. Ryan forced himself to stand, voice trembling. "It's fine," he said, though his bravado had cracked. He lifted his flashlight and trained it on the rope. Empty. Nothing there. And yet, they all knew. They were no longer alone beneath the devil's tree. Norton, shy. The night pressed in heavy and absolute, the fire reduced to dying embers, the only real light, the trembling beam of Ryan's flashlight. The four of them huddled close, breaths short and ragged, as though the darkness would swallow them whole if they strayed apart. Chris held his camera tight, eyes glued to the screen. To the naked eye, the rope was empty. But through the lens, something else appeared. A pale, blurred figure hanging limp, head slumped to the side, hair shrouding its face. He shuddered but couldn't look away. When he panned to another branch, another body swung there. Then another. and another. 2, 3, 4, until the clearing seemed choked with swaying spectral shapes. His throat was dry as he whispered, trembling, "Guys, look at this!" Ryan snatched the camera, pressing his face close to the viewfinder. The excitement drained from him, replaced by a stark pallor. It's just a glitch," he insisted. But when he lifted his flashlight and swept the beam across the tree, Lena screamed. For an instant, they all saw it. No camera tricks, no shadows. A body dangled from the branch before them, swaying in the breeze. The skin was ashen, the head hung low, the weight shifting with each creak of the rope. And then, as if dispersed by the air itself, it vanished, leaving the rope to swing hollow once more. Silence. Only Maya's choked sobs broke it. Ryan tried to steady his voice, though it trembled. Hallucinations were just stressed. But even as he spoke, a sharp crack split the stillness, like a branch snapping under a heavy load. Lena spun around and froze. Just a few steps behind her, another hanged figure. Its eyes were open, rolled white, fixed directly on her. Her scream tore through the clearing as she yanked Ryan to the ground. The fire spat and flared, shadows whipping wildly. Chris swung the camera in every direction, capturing what none of them could deny now. Dozens of figures suspended above, crowding the branches. Some only faint outlines, others so vivid he could see the deep purple bruises wrapped around their necks. Maya clutched her ears, shrieking, "They're whispering! They're calling me! They want me to follow!" Lena sized her shoulders, fighting to hold her back, but Maya writhed, as though invisible hands were dragging her toward the trunk. Ryan raised his light, shouting into the void, "We're not afraid. We only came to see." But his voice was drowned in the sudden chorus of sound, the simultaneous screech of ropes straining, taut and merciless. Above, the phantom bodies swayed together in rhythm, a silent choir twisting in a wind that wasn't there. A pale glow shimmered faintly, as though the clearing itself had become a macabre stage. Chris let the camera drop, clutching his head, mumbling, "They're not going away. They're here. They want us to take their place." The fire died with a hiss, plunging everything into suffocating black. Only Ryan's flashlight flickered, its beam jittering across fractured glimpses of horror. And in that trembling glow, all three saw the same vision. Themselves, each one of them, hanging from the branches. Bloated faces, bulging eyes, rope-burned necks. The flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling, casting fractured light up the trunk of the devil's tree. Maya went still, her eyes emptied, her lips moved with a voice that wasn't hers. "You cannot leave. The tree has chosen." No one had time to react. A sudden gust of icy air swept the clearing, and the rope groaned loud and sharp, ready, waiting for a neck to claim. "Nyobima." The wind howled through the clearing like a chorus of the damned. Shadows danced wildly across the devil's tree, broken fragments of light from Ryan's fallen flashlight stuttering across the dirt and flaring briefly against the swaying figures above. Maya stood rigid, eyes rolled white, lips moving ceaselessly. "It's calling me, telling me to climb higher. It says I'll be free." Her voice was no longer her own. It was layered, distorted, as though countless other voices were speaking through her, groaning from deep within the earth. Lena clutched her tightly, sobbing. Don't listen. Maya. It's not real. It's not. But Maya's body was cold and stiff, as lifeless as a corpse on its feet. Ryan lunged forward, grabbing Maya's arm to pull her away from the trunk. The moment he touched her, a crushing force clamped onto his hand. Agony seared down to his bones. He tore himself free with a scream, collapsing, his palm seared red with rope-like burns, as though the bark itself had branded him. "The tree," Chris stammered, his camera trembling in his grip. "It's alive. It wants blood. It won't let us leave." He swung the lens upward and saw that the hanging shapes were no longer spectral illusions. They moved, their heads tilted in unison, gazes falling on the living below. White, lidless eyes gaped wide, mouths hung open. And for a heartbeat, Chris swore he heard it, the collective crack of necks snapping, echoing through the clearing. Then it struck. From above, a rope uncoiled, slithering down with the speed of a striking snake. In an instant, the noose cinched tight around Maya's throat and yanked her skyward. Her scream split the night. She kicked and clawed, her legs thrashing as the rope bit deeper, skin darkening to a brutal violet. Lena and Ryan seized her legs, dragging downward with all their strength, but the invisible force from the tree pulled harder, inexorable. Inch by inch, Maya rose into the air. "Cut it! Cut the rope!" Ryan roared. Chris fumbled in his pack, yanked out a small knife, and slashed at the noose. Sparks flew as the blade bounced off. The rope wasn't fiber at all, but something impossibly hard, like frozen steel. Chris staggered back, hands trembling. Maya shrieked, then fell silent. Her body twitched violently before sagging, limp. Her eyes bulged, her chest heaving ragged gasps that faltered and broke. The only sound was the dry rasp of the rope grinding against bark. "No!" Lena screamed, clawing at the tree itself, her fingers splitting, blood streaking the bark. But the branches writhed like grotesque limbs, curling out and striking her down into the dirt. Ryan's voice cracked into madness. He threw his arms wide, shouting at the looming trunk. "What do you want? Take me instead. Let her go." And the forest answered. A laughter erupted, harsh, guttural, spilling from every direction at once. It was everywhere, echoing in the trees, grinding through the soil, shaking in their bones. The hanged shadows thrashed wildly, swaying like a grotesque choir applauding his desperate plea. Chris filmed, his voice breaking into a whisper. "It never lets go. Anyone who comes here belongs to it." Maya dangled high above, her neck grotesquely twisted, and then, slowly, her lifeless eyes rolled forward, bleaching to a blank, vacant stare. The same hollow gaze as the others. Another body had joined the Devil's Tree's eternal chorus of the damned. Penny, meow. Maya dangled in the air, her body limp, her face bruised and purple, her eyes hollowed into something that no longer belonged to the living. Lena screamed her name again and again, but her cries were swallowed by the skeletal trees, fading into nothingness. Ryan yanked Lena to her feet, the burn marks of the rope still glowing red across his palm. His voice cracked, raw with desperation. "We have to leave, now, before it takes us too." Chris clutched the camera tight, trembling. "You don't get it. There is no way out. It won't let us go." As if to confirm his words, The forest shifted before their eyes. The path they had taken to enter this place was gone, swallowed whole. In its place loomed walls of trees, their twisted branches knitting together like blackened fingers to bar their escape. Every direction they turned, the beam of the flashlight cut only into suffocating dark heavy with swaying silhouettes, bodies swinging just beyond reach. Lena's teeth chattered. It's like we're trapped inside it. Ryan's grip tightened around the knife, his eyes feral. Then we kill it. We cut the damn tree down. He lunged at the gnarled trunk, hacking again and again. Each strike rang out not like wood, but like shrieks, agonized, piercing, human. Thick sap bled from the wounds, dark and syrupy, reeking of iron and rot. The stench gagged Lena. She doubled over, retching. Chris instinctively raised the camera. Through the lens, Ryan's form blurred, his face flickering into that of a hanging corpse, eyes bulging, mouth gaping in eternal scream. "Ryan, stop!" Chris cried out. "It's turning you into one of them." The knife slipped from Ryan's grip. He staggered back, clawing at his throat. Rope marks carved deep across his neck, tightening as if dragged by an invisible noose. His breath hitched, a wet rattle. He reached toward Lena with trembling fingers. "Run, Lena, run!" She seized his hand, sobbing, trying to wrench him free from the tree's hold. But in a heartbeat, the darkness surged, devouring him whole. When the flashlight swung back, Ryan was gone. Only a rope dangled gently from a branch, swaying in silence. Lena collapsed, choking on grief. Chris hauled her up, his own voice shredded. "We have to keep moving. We have to try." They stumbled blindly through the shifting woods, but the deeper they ran, the more the forest filled with them. Bodies, hanging from every branch, dozens, hundreds. Vacant eyes followed their steps, mouths slack in silent mockery. Among the faces, Lena saw Maya, Ryan, and countless others she didn't know, victims of generations past, bound eternally to the tree's curse. Their family had grown. The flashlight sputtered, its glow dimming battery drained to the final breath. Chris whispered to the dark, as if confessing to himself. "As long as the camera records, someone will know. Someone has to know." But Lena already understood. No one would believe. No one would ever find them. The wind rose in a hollow roar, twisting into laughter, into a dirge. Overhead, the moon vanished behind the branches, smothered. The forest drowned in black. The tree had chosen. In a quiet Pennsylvania town, whispers still linger about an old house built at the end of the 19th century. Beneath its creaking wooden floors lies a bottomless cellar, where darkness swallows every trace of light. Those who dared to descend never returned. Only the echo of footsteps remains, repeating endlessly through the night. The house has changed owners many times, but no one has ever stayed for long. Now, a middle-aged man has moved in, clinging to the hope of a fresh start, unaware that the darkness has been waiting for him. And soon. Arthur turned off the main road just as dusk settled over the town. Autumn in Pennsylvania hung heavy in the air, damp, cold, and pressing down on everything, even his thoughts. The house waited at the bottom of the hill, a hulking shape of darkened timber, its roof sagging beneath the weight of age, its windows rotted and hollow like empty eyes staring into the void. The moment Arthur pushed open the door, he was swallowed by the smell of mildew and rotting wood. The hinges wailed in protest, a long metallic groan, like something grieving. The ceiling loomed high but shrouded in shadow, draped with cobwebs that fell like curtains. The floorboards groaned underfoot, each step echoing far too loudly for the size of the room, as if the house were hollow inside and slowly devouring every sound. He followed a narrow corridor where weak light seeped through dust-streaked windows, revealing peeling paint and dark stains creeping along the walls. The rooms lay abandoned, furniture cloaked in sheets, the chill sinking into his skin. The farther he walked, the heavier the air became, thick and suffocating, as though the house itself breathed at a slower, alien rhythm. At the end of the hallway, he noticed a door smaller than the rest. When he pulled it open, a yawning darkness stared back. A steep wooden staircase plunged downward, its steps slick and blackened with damp. From below drifted a breath of air, cold, earthy, smelling of stone and decay, carrying with it the sense of something endless. Arthur froze, his heartbeat pounding. He snatched a lantern from the hall, its yellow flame trembling as he lowered it toward the stairs. The light reached only the first few steps before being consumed by shadow. The silence below was oppressive, as though even sound refused to exist there. An inexplicable pull urged him forward. Arthur placed his foot on the first step. The wood groaned sharply. Then the sound died into nothing. He descended further, the lantern flickering, casting light on stone walls, slick with moisture. The deeper he went, the thicker the dark became, as if some enormous hand were closing around the space itself. Suddenly, he stopped. A chill threaded its way up his spine, an instinctive warning he couldn't ignore. He lifted his gaze downward and saw only a vast black pit with no end. The lantern flame sputtered, dimmed, and nearly died, leaving him stranded in a suffocating abyss. Heart racing. Arthur turned back and climbed quickly, his breath ragged. When the cellar door shut behind him, the sound reverberated through the house, like the heavy exhale of something ancient and waiting in the dark. He did not know that, with that single step, he had awakened what had been patient for more than a century. Nay, Awims down, deep. The first night in the old house dragged on like a trial. Arthur lay on the sagging wooden bed, the thin blanket useless against the chill that seeped from the floorboards and stone walls. Outside, the wind hissed through cracks in the shutters, but it could not mask another sound rising from the depths below. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, as though someone were climbing the cellar stairs, one creaking step at a time. Each groan of wood reverberated through the silence, too precise, too human to dismiss. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut, telling himself it was only the timbers settling in the night's cold. But the rhythm was undeniable. He tossed and turned until dawn, when at last the sound dissolved, as if it had never been there. The next morning, Arthur buried himself in chores to shake the unease. He dusted old tables, flung open the windows, let sunlight flood the rooms, yet no matter how bright the day, the house remained damp and clammy. Out in the yard, he caught the gaze of an elderly neighbor standing motionless, cane in hand, watching. The wrinkled face gave no sign of feeling. only lingering too long on the half-open cellar door before turning away. That wordless glance etched itself into Arthur's mind like a silent warning. On the second night, the sounds returned. This time, they began faintly, as if from some unreachable depth. The measured rhythm struck through bone, louder and longer than before. Arthur sat upright, his pulse racing, listening. The footsteps climbed higher, step by step, then stopped just beyond the cellar door. He held his breath, his body rigid with terror. A dead hush followed. Then breathing, heavy, ragged, pressing against the wood. It crawled into his ears, hot and wet, until his skin prickled. Candle in hand, Arthur crept to the hallway. His legs trembled. The flame quivered with each of his own breaths. When his fingers brushed the icy iron handle, the sound cut off at once. He cracked the door open. Nothing, only a slab of black silence, thick and endless. Yet a blast of frigid air rushed past him, reeking of damp earth and something faintly metallic, almost bloody. He slammed the door shut and leaned against it, heart hammering, listening to the suffocating quiet pressing in from every wall. The days that followed unraveled into fragments. Each night, the footsteps came back. Sometimes near, sometimes far. Sometimes slow, sometimes hurried. Never the same, never predictable. On the longest nights, they endured until morning, leaving Arthur hollow-eyed with exhaustion. The house itself became a chamber of echoes, bending every sound into warped reflections of something colder, crueler. And then, the house began to change. Window frames rattled, though the air outside was still. The walls seemed to flex, expanding and contracting with some uncanny rhythm. Wherever Arthur stood, the sound of the cellar found him, tapping against his thoughts like the heartbeat of an unseen thing. One storm-heavy night, as rain battered the roof, the footsteps grew louder than ever. Arthur strained to catch the rhythm and froze as realization pierced him. The cadence was not random at all. It matched his own, the exact pattern of his descent down the cellar steps that first evening. He understood then. The thing below was not simply climbing upward. It was repeating him, mirroring his every step, calling him back. Arthur fled to his room, but the knowledge gnawed at him. The darkness beneath the cellar had begun to learn his rhythm, and each night it drew closer. Me. Daylight no longer brought comfort. For Arthur, each morning opened only into a hollow stretch of waiting until night. He woke with a gaunt face, eyes ringed in bruised shadows from sleepless hours. Daily routines fell away. Instead, he sat for long stretches in the hallway, eyes fixed on the cellar door, as though it might vanish if he dared to look elsewhere. The staircase seemed to possess its own pull, an invisible gravity. Whenever Arthur closed his eyes, he found himself placing a foot on the first step, hearing the drawn-out groan of wood that never ended. Each night, the footsteps returned, calling him downward. Fatigue, insomnia, and mounting tension twisted into something like addiction. He had to know what waited below. One afternoon, unable to resist, Arthur lit a lantern and opened the door. A rush of cold air surged up, carrying the sour breath of rotting earth. He began to descend, counting each step. 12, 25, 40. The numbers climbed rapidly, but no solid ground appeared. Only darkness thickening around him. He pressed on, shirt damp with sweat, heart battering his ribs. When he finally lifted the lantern, its glow revealed nothing more than a damp wall of stone, water dripping with the slow, steady pulse of a heartbeat. The staircase stretched endlessly downward, no end in sight. The thought of having walked hundreds of steps made his skin crawl. Dizzy, he turned and climbed back up. Yet it took only minutes to return to the door, as though the impossible distance had folded in on itself. Arthur collapsed on the floor, chest heaving. The logic of space had broken. The staircase stretched and contracted at will, a trap that twisted time and distance alike. It did not lead simply into darkness. It bent reality to its own hunger. From that day, Arthur changed. He nearly lived by the cellar door, chair pressed close to the threshold, straining to catch every faint sound rising from below. Outside, the town carried on in the crisp chill of autumn. But inside, time stalled. The air thickened. Silence pressed close like a suffocating fog. One afternoon, a knock came. A tall, severe-faced town inspector stepped inside, moving through the rooms with a notebook, his presence filling the house with uneasy scrutiny. Arthur followed, heart pounding, terrified the man might touch the cellar door. But the inspector left without approaching it, leaving Arthur alone again with the waiting dark. Afterward, the footsteps changed. No longer slow, no longer patient. They grew rapid, frantic, like someone running, always chasing upward from some unseeable depth. Arthur sat entranced, listening for hours, until the rhythm began to sync with his own racing pulse. One night, he gave in. He opened the door and sat on the first step, lantern quivering in his hand. The echoes swarmed, pressing from every angle, impossible to distinguish from his own fevered thoughts. The darkness below swelled, crawling up the steps like a tide of black water. Arthur closed his eyes and saw himself descending forever, never turning back. The staircase had bewitched him, tightening its grip with every hour, every night. The haunting was no longer outside him. It had nested within. Arthur could no longer tell whether he chose to obey or was compelled by something older, deeper. The staircase had become part of him, and he knew, next time, he would not escape. Now, Lucie. The days drifted by in a haze. Arthur gazed at himself in the dust-covered hallway mirror, and the first thing that chilled him to the bone was the eyes. The thing in the mirror stared back at him longer than it should, as if there were a delay. When Arthur tilted his head, the reflection moved more slowly, its eyes faintly glowing with a light that did not belong to him. From that day, the reflection began to reveal subtle differences. Sometimes it smiled faintly while his real face remained expressionless. Sometimes the arm in the mirror moved sluggishly, as if trying to reach out. At night, when candlelight cast shadows on the walls, Arthur noticed that the figure in the reflection stood still when he walked, then vanished entirely for a fleeting moment, leaving behind a chilling emptiness. The whispers from the basement grew louder. At first, they were only indistinct murmurs, but then they became clearer, stretching his name in a heavy rhythm. The walls of the house seemed to pulse like living flesh, with cold air seeping through every crack. The windows were gradually consumed by darkness until daylight was reduced to a thin, pale layer that could no longer penetrate inside. One evening, when Arthur looked out into the yard, he saw his old neighbor stooping beside the fence. In the blink of an eye, a shadowy figure dragged the man toward the basement stairs, vanishing as if it had never been there. Arthur rushed out but found only emptiness, and the basement door stood ajar, trembling faintly as though someone had just touched it. Arthur's mind began to fracture. He saw himself in the mirror, descending the endless staircase, lantern trembling in his hand, eyes hollow. The image repeated, each time deeper, darker, until one night, the reflection no longer followed him. Instead, it stood waiting on the 10th step, turning back with a face identical to Arthur's, but with a void-like gaze, as if inviting him. Arthur felt his body compelled forward. The house was silent, the air thick, every door tightly shut. The staircase yawned open like the mouth of an abyss. His shadow on the wall had vanished, replaced only by the imposter waiting below. Arthur knew that if he stepped down this time, he would never return. But the flame within his heart no longer belonged to him. It belonged to the basement. Arthur no longer resisted. On the final night, he opened the basement door, letting the cold coil around his body like invisible fingers. The staircase stretched before him, black and infinite. The lantern in his hand trembled, its meager light swallowed by the void, leaving behind shadows that expanded and contracted as if they were breathing. He began to descend. The groan of wood echoed, then dissolved into nothing. Each step sank deeper into his body, transforming into an alien rhythm that no longer belonged to Arthur. From the depths, whispers rose to meet him, merging with his footsteps, forming a ghastly chorus. Time no longer existed. Distance no longer mattered. There was only repetition. Arthur kept descending, counting in his head, but the numbers tangled and slipped away. When he looked up, the stairs still stretched on, endless, without destination. Around him, blurred figures emerged, emaciated, hollow-eyed shades trudging in the same eternal loop. They did not see him. They only continued, trapped like puppets in the punishment of darkness. Arthur realized with sudden horror that the footsteps he had heard night after night were never from another soul. They had always been his own, an echo of himself, bound forever in this warped space, the sound of a destiny already sealed. Panic flared. He tried to turn back, but his legs refused to obey. They carried him downward, steady and unyielding, until his steps blended seamlessly with the eternal echo. The lantern died, plunging him into the infinite pit, where there was no longer a line between man and shadow. By morning, the house was silent. A town inspector stopped by, jotting down notes about a suspicious disappearance. The basement door was closed, dust thick upon it, as though no hand had touched it in years. Arthur was gone without a trace, leaving only the house itself, cold and patient, waiting for the next soul. And at night, those who pass the slope swear they hear sounds rising from beneath the earth, footsteps, slow and deliberate, repeating endlessly, never fading. They say it is Arthur, now part of the basement itself, devoured along with all who dared to gaze into the darkness. Meow. In the backroads of rural Maine, where dirt paths twist into a forgotten valley, there lies an abandoned apple orchard left to rot since the 1970s. The trees stand blackened and skeletal, their brittle branches clawing at the sky like the bones of something long dead. Waist-high weeds choke the ground, and the locals steer clear of the land. At night, between the rows of lifeless trees, a constant murmur drifts through the wind, like prayers swallowed before they can be heard. They say it's the voices of those who vanished there, never to return. Now Eleanor, a woman in her 50s, has come back to reclaim the land that once belonged to her family. Knee. By late afternoon, Eleanor pulled her car to a stop before the rusted gate of the old farm. She stood in silence, staring down the moss-choked path that disappeared into the shadows of the orchard. The two-story wooden house emerged from behind the trees, its roof sagging, windows shattered, the wind whistling through the broken glass like a trapped animal's cry. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning beneath her weight. The smell of mildew and decayed wood invaded her lungs. Beyond the house, the orchard stretched out like a vast graveyard. Hundreds of apple trees stood rigid and blackened, their brittle limbs reaching upward like skeletal hands frozen in prayer. Weeds strangled the roots, spilling across cracked furrows, obscuring the old paths. Yet, amid the desolation, Eleanor noticed something strange. A few branches shivered, leaves clattering together in a dry whisper. But there was no wind. Not even the faintest breath stirred the air. The sound grew sharper, rising like a chorus of murmurs carried from far away, before falling suddenly into silence. At the edge of the orchard, she saw a figure bent low at the base of a tree. A gardener, lean and mud-stained, moving with deliberate patience. He never lifted his head, never showed his face. Eleanor stood frozen, watching until the figure slipped behind a thicket and vanished, leaving only the raw emptiness of the ground behind. Turning back toward the house, Eleanor caught sight of another figure, a minister standing not far away. He paused only briefly, his eyes fixed on the orchard with a gaze that lingered like a warning left unspoken. Then he turned and drifted into the pale gray mist settling over the valley. Dusk drained the light from the sky, and Eleanor realized she was standing alone in the stillness. Not every tree here had withered. At the orchard center, one apple tree towered above the rest, its leaves vivid, trembling under the last traces of daylight. It looked unnaturally alive, as though the entire orchard's stolen vitality had been poured into this single trunk. The sky collapsed into darkness. Eleanor felt the orchard behind her, vast and gaping, like a black mouth whispering for her to step inside. A gray dawn bled across the fields, mist curling thick around the orchard, until it looked like a blurred silhouette suspended in silence. Eleanor stepped onto the porch, breathing in the damp chill, her eyes drawn once more to the single green tree at the center. Through the haze, its canopy glimmered with unnatural vitality, weighed down by countless swollen apples. She moved closer, her steps heavy on the wet earth. At the trunk, she realized these were no ordinary fruits. Their skins were misshapen, blistered, bulging with veins that pulsed faintly beneath the surface. Some hung grotesquely large, as though something inside them strained to break free. Eleanor's body recoiled, but her gaze clung to the sight. One apple dropped. The sound was wrong, hollow, echoing like a shell cracking underfoot. Its skin split open, releasing a thick black ooze that spread across the soil. Inside, for an instant, something small and round gleamed. An eye, human in shape, curling in on itself before collapsing into nothing, leaving only a wet stain seeping into the ground. Eleanor clenched her fists, but dared not stoop closer. From deep within the orchard, the murmurs began again. This time clearer, layered with many voices breathing as one, whispering like a desperate prayer. The sound slithered through the brittle branches, coiling along the trunks until it wrapped itself around Eleanor. She felt it crowding her ears, as though unseen bodies had gathered at her side, whispering just beyond her sight. Though before her stood only the corpses of trees. Movement caught her eye. The gaunt gardener had returned, carrying an old wicker basket. He approached the thriving tree and stooped, gathering the twisted fruit as they fell, placing each one gently into the basket. His face remained hidden in shadow, but the slow, deliberate rhythm of his motions carried more of ritual than labor. When the basket filled, he turned and slipped into the rows of dead wood, vanishing without a trace, leaving an emptiness that felt colder than before. The sun climbed higher, but its pale light could not banish the chill. Eleanor retreated into the house, carrying a dread she could not yet name. That night, as she sat alone in the dark, a steady plop echoed from the orchard, the sound of apples striking the ground. They fell in rhythm, each thud mingling with the relentless whispers that threaded through the night, a dirge without end. Eleanor closed her eyes, but the sound clung to her. It crept into her dreams, a voice that did not speak to her, but through her, as if the orchard had found its way into her mind. Oh, Arthur. On the third night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. The valley outside lay in absolute stillness, yet the curtain by her window stirred, as if touched by an unseen hand. In the dark, she heard it, a faint sound at first, like shallow breathing, which slowly unraveled into whispers. They weren't confined to the porch. They seeped into the room, coiling around her bed, slipping into her chest like smoke. She sat upright, her pulse pounding. From the window, the orchard stretched wide beneath the pale wash of moonlight. The dead trees stood rigid, skeletal silhouettes on guard. And in the center, the lone living tree shivered violently, its leaves trembling, though not a breath of wind stirred. The whispers rose into a chorus, hundreds of voices woven together. Some words broke free, clear and sharp. They called her name. Familiar voices, voices she hadn't heard since childhood, voices long buried in memory. Eleanor descended the stairs, the rotted floorboards glowing faintly where the moonlight fell. When she opened the front door, a current of icy air wrapped around her, urging her toward the orchard. Each step sank into the damp earth with a dull, sucking thud, blending with the murmur that thickened around her. It no longer felt like sound. It clung to her, burrowing into her heartbeat, as if someone whispered directly into her ear. At the foot of the green tree, she froze. From its bark bled a viscous, tar-like sap, running down in glistening streaks. The soil beneath the roots pulsed, swelling, sinking, like the breath of something alive. The whispers swelled with it, rumbling through the ground, as though the orchard itself was one colossal, living body. Far off, in the shadows, something shifted. The gardener stood between two rows of withered trees, his narrow shoulders hunched. He didn't approach. He didn't vanish. He simply watched. His silent presence made Eleanor's skin crawl, but the voices at her ear tugged her back toward the roots. When she returned inside, a book waited on the table. Dust filmed the cover, its spine cracked and brittle, yet it lay open on a passage she knew she hadn't touched. Faded ink spelled out fragments, the forbidden fruit, the mingling of blood and soil, the feeding of souls. Eleanor's breath caught. She hadn't left this here. Outside, the whispers pressed against the window panes, hammering every word into her skull. The night stretched long. Eleanor sat awake, rigid, her ears straining. Footsteps circled the house, measured, deliberate. The tread was unmistakable. Her own footsteps, the exact rhythm she had taken through the orchard that afternoon, now played back to her, endlessly, tauntingly. Each time they ceased, The whispers surged louder, faster, more insistent. Urging dial. Waiting. By dawn, Eleanor slumped in her chair, her body hollow with exhaustion. But she knew the truth now. The orchard had found her. It would never release its call, and the whispers would not stop, not until she stepped deeper into its darkness. Okay. The day dragged on in a haze of exhaustion, yet Eleanor found herself unable to leave the house. Each time the thought of escape flickered through her mind, the whispers rose again, an invisible wall of sound pressing her back. She sat on the porch, eyes fixed on the orchard, watching the brittle branches twitch without cause. By nightfall, the fog rolled in heavy and thick, smothering the path. Moonlight washed the orchard in a pale glow, turning the trees into twisted pillars of bone. Heart pounding, Eleanor stepped into the mist. Her body trembled, but her feet carried her forward, deeper into the maze of dead rows stretching endlessly in every direction. The voices came clearer than ever before. Not just strangers now. Woven among them were the tones she knew by heart. Her father's stern voice, her mother's soft cadence, the faint laughter of her sister, long dead. The sound tangled around her, calling her name, flooding her mind with flickers of memory. Family dinners, warm hands once clasped, now nothing but dust. She shook, but her heart lurched toward them. At the orchard center, she stopped. From the fog emerged figures, blurred at first like vapor, then sharpening into faces. Her father's stern eyes, her mother in her faded dress, her sister with her hair cascading loose. They stood silent beneath the skeletal trees, their skin pale, almost translucent in the moonlight, their eyes bottomless, locked on Eleanor. She staggered back, but the faces did not fade. They drifted with her, step for step, yet no footfalls echoed on the ground. Only the whispers persisted, this time spilling from their closed mouths. Words without meaning tangled into a low, droning chant, warped and endless. In their midst, the lone green tree loomed, its twisted canopy alive with grotesque fruit. Apples glistened in the dark, shining like eyes. One dropped, rolling to Eleanor's feet. Its skin split open, revealing a child's smiling face before collapsing into a slick of black liquid that bled into the soil. The gardener appeared again. This time he was close, standing right beside the living tree. Moonlight carved his gaunt features into shadow and bone. His hollow sockets stared upward, while his thin hands clung to the bark. When his mouth opened, the same whispers poured out, merging seamlessly with the voices of the orchard, as if he too had become one of them. Eleanor realized she was sitting on the cold ground, though she couldn't remember lowering herself. The chill seeped through her dress, her trembling hands resting on her lap. Around her, the faces closed in, slowly leaning nearer, until the icy breath of their skin brushed hers. At the center, the tree quivered, its strange fruit trembling violently, as if feeding on her very presence. Above, clouds devoured the moon, plunging the orchard into suffocating dark. In that moment, Eleanor felt it. The orchard, inhaling, its breath filling her chest, exhaling in unison through her own lungs. The whispers roared in harmony, 1,000 voices braided into one. And for the first time, she understood. It was an invitation, a demand, a promise of reunion forever. And Adi, when dawn never came. The sky hung heavy, thick with a gray so dense it seemed to swallow the light itself. Eleanor sat motionless at the edge of the orchard, eyes locked on the lone green tree that pulsed with unnatural light. Around it, the dead trunks stood in their endless rows, but in the silence she felt them waiting, as though each rotting vein of wood carried a faint, patient heartbeat. The faces emerged again through the fog. Not just her parents and sister now, but countless others. Strangers with hollow black eyes and sealed lips, their silence taut with demand. Yet the whispers no longer came from them. They rose instead from the soil, from the roots, from the relentless pounding in Eleanor's chest. Her hand brushed the ground. The earth trembled, yielding soft and damp like living flesh. Beneath the grass, her fingers grazed sharp fragments, small bones, human teeth, rings tarnished with rust. The orchard was not merely dead, it had been fed. Every soul that vanished had seeped into its roots, its fruit, its endless murmurs. At the center, the green tree shuddered, convulsing with hunger. Apples cascaded to the ground, bursting open in wet cracks. Inside lay shreds of dark red tissue, scraps of shriveled skin. The air thickened with the stench of blood and rot, so heavy it clawed at the lungs. Eleanor swayed, her head swimming, yet her feet carried her closer. The faces leaned low, eyes burning with expectation, the circle closing in. They did not move, yet their silence pressed on her, an invisible weight driving her toward the tree. The whispers had become one sound now, a single, drawn-out note vibrating through her skull, a command, a summons to return to the source. She placed her hand on the trunk. The bark was cold, thrumming like a living pulse. In that instant, Eleanor felt herself unravel. Her breath, her blood, her very sense of self seeped downward into the veins beneath the soil. Darkness filled her vision, not with fear, but with a stillness so absolute it seemed to hum with hidden voices. By morning, the gardener stood among the trees, an empty basket in his hands. The green tree was heavy with fruit, its leaves lush, casting a cool shadow over the ground. There was no sign of Eleanor. Only the whispers remained, softer now, as though a new voice had been folded into their song. And from that day on, the orchard grew quieter than ever. But for those who dared to step close and listen long enough, there was always one more note in the chorus of the wind. Nilmende.